Muncie is famous as Middletown.
They were unable to see the whole picture. It wasn't just Muncie, Indiana. It was on the news on every goddamn channel every night about health care affecting somebody somewhere.
Now that when I look back on that, we didn't realize that it was going to become an issue down the road.
Being a member of a union it's got its good points, and I think it's got its bad points too.
This is my Monday morning routine, trash day, getting ready for another day at the plant. There we go. My name is William B. McIntosh, Sr. Alrighty. An employee at BorgWarner Automotive. Worked there 25 years, 8 months. I really come from a lineage of UAW workers. That's really all I know. Okay, I'm off to work. My grandfather, hardworking man, 92 years old. He's working at Indiana Steel and Wire. He put 34 years in. He was the first African-American president of his local union. Always worked, always worked. The thing I got from my grandfather was to be a hard worker, and it always paid off. And I just, always admired him when it came to hard work and his dedication to the union. And I learned it at an early age. I don't know. Good old BorgWarner. Here we are, Monday morning, April 6, 2009. Another day.
Another day at the factory.
Yeah. A friend of my mom's was a supervisor at BorgWarner at the time. Heard that I was unemployed and got me an application, so I got on. In 1983, I was 25 at the time.
I hired in Warner Gear in July of 1983. I think I was right around 21. And I hired in assembly. And at that time, assembly at Warner Gear was good jobs. The first day there was scary. It was a big place. It was big enough where you could get lost in it, if you didn't have a map. When I was growing up, I could probably work at General Motors, which was Chevrolet, or Delco Battery, which is where my father worked, or Warner Gear. A lot of the young kids, as I was growing up, those were the jobs that they sought after. And at that time, there was, plenty of them jobs. The auto industry, and mainly and most of all, the UAW has provided for me my entire life. I'm 47.
A shift change at BorgWarner in Muncie. Employees got word Thursday morning the plant is closing. The move means the loss of all 780 jobs here, jobs that average more than $20 an hour. Still, the announcement not entirely unexpected.
They've been downsizing, getting rid of our product line, so we knew it was coming, we just didn't know when.
No matter, the news tough to swallow.
When you spend 21 years, it's kind of a shocker.
BorgWarner has a long history in Muncie. Here since the early 1900s, it's one of the city's biggest employers.
My wife and I will sit down and decide what we're going to do. The old adage, when one door shuts, another one will open somewhere.
This is a story about Muncie, Indiana, the nation's Middletown, and its place in American automotive history, and the unions that played such a significant part in molding and shaping the community's middle class.
It's a story of innovation and entrepreneurship that built a company. It's a story of a community that rose up around a handful of manufacturing operations. But in the end, it's also a story about how all the arrangements that made all of those things possible unravel.
This is Muncie, Indiana, a community now with about 60,000 residents. A community perhaps best known as the nation's Middletown, the most studied community in the United States. But this was also the home of UAW Local 287. Their emblem was on the sign next to that of BorgWarner. This gave them their place in the community, their identity. They're part of Muncie, Indiana. At one time, Muncie had thousands of well-paying production line jobs. Jobs that enabled people to enter the American middle class, to fulfill their American dream. But those jobs are all gone now. Muncie is a community busily trying to reinvent itself, to remain optimistic, to be hopeful, to find a new niche.
It's what I call my daily bread. I always try to read some scriptures, send me on my way. Today's topic would be the honor of your friendship. Kind of ironic, huh? But Jesus gave us another standard by which we gauge friendship. In anticipation of his death on the cross, he said, "Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for his friend." This depth of friendship isn't merely about doing the right thing. It's about sacrifice. Love is more than a sentiment. It's putting another's needs ahead of your own. I think that's kind of ironic. I mean, it's April the 9th, Thursday, and it just happens to be on the day that be looking at some of my friends that I've had over the last 20 years or so. Wow. Some you may see again, some you may never see again. So I didn't pick it, but that's how God works, you know. I was just planning to just take a different route in and also just not even get the paper because I want to kind of get myself ready for not having this routine, if you want to call it that, for what I've been doing the last 25 years.
I was born and raised in Muncie, and getting a job at Warner Gear was big, really. I had a chance to go in 73, I believe it was, right after I got out of high school, 71 or 73, I had a chance to go. And didn't want to do it because I didn't want to work inside. I wanted to go construction. But then, you know, you get married. That's when you're single and you get married and you get a house. You got to have a job 12 months, 12 months out of the year instead of about 8 months.
Bacon, what are you doing? Bacon.
My uncle retired from there. My grandfather worked there, and he was one of the first to get the union going. There was quite a bit of pride of being in the UAW, working for BorgWarner, really. Because at one time, before I was there, they said they was 5,000 or 6,000 strong. There was a piece in the paper this morning. I see where they got it on market. They got it up for sale now. So hopefully somebody will buy it and, won't have to, because it's been here for a long time.
I started in 2 weeks from Friday. I'll have 40 years. So I've been there quite a while. And back then it was called Warner Gear, and it will kind of always be Warner Gear to me. I always knew this day would come. I would retire, and it was getting close to that point anyway, but it was kind of always, it would be my choice. I would have been, deciding the day when I would stop working. And now it's been decided for me.
It's after they announced the plant closing, I'm going, Jesus Christ. I'm 47. I got 26 years in that place. I just needed 4 more years to get my retirement. And then when they announced, that they was going to shut down, I thought, damn, So it's, for me, it's from 47 to 65 now. That's what I'm looking at retirement, you know. Grab my keys, lock it up. Well, looks like it's gonna be a beautiful day today anyway, doesn't it?
This used to be one of the largest manufacturing cities. I mean, as far as manufacturing industrial work for years. We're the last major manufacturing plant to go now.
The gas boom, as they called it, really created Muncie. With the discovery of gas in the 1880s, it quickly became a boom town, a bustling industrial city, and it remained that way, and it became a center of automobile parts manufacturing in the 20th century. And perhaps the most famous company to be drawn to Muncie by natural gas was the Ball Corporation. It was run by 5 brothers from Buffalo, New York, who wanted to relocate their glass-blowing company to a place in this gas belt. Muncie offered them $5,000 free land and free gas if they would come and set up their factory in Muncie. And so they did. They came to Muncie in 1886. Their business took off. It was an enormous advantage to have free fuel. And the Ball Corporation became an important company in the city and really one of the most prosperous companies in the country by the end of the 19th century. And Muncie did this for a lot of other businesses. They started luring businesses here in the 1880s and 1890s at a really rapid pace. By the end of the 1890s, there were 7 glass companies. There were, I think, 14 iron and steel foundries. There was a washing machine company. It was an industrial city. It had gone from a sleepy town to an industrial city almost overnight. Muncie continued to grow through the 20th century. It became a prosperous working-class town. By the middle of the century, it had a population of about 50,000 people. This transformation drew the attention of sociologists who came to Muncie in the 20s to study the impact of industrialization. They called Muncie Middletown and turned it into a place where people came to understand Middle America.
I always thought that Muncie was a pretty safe place to raise a family. It was always easy for me to go visit the bigger cities on vacations or what have you. But to raise a family, I always thought Muncie was right up there at the top. You know, we used to have friends and relatives that would come here to visit, and they would always, man, ain't nothing to do here, ain't nothing to do. And you know, we have a few things to do, but to me, it was just a better place to raise, because I used to hear the stories from their families and stuff of what's going on in the cities. And I always thought that Muncie was a safer place.
BorgWarner, over the years, in the late 50s and 60s, we had, I think, 6,000 employees at one time. BorgWarner was a good place to work over the years. I've enjoyed working there. Met a lot of friends, worked around a lot of people. Like I said, we've had good times and bad times, but you know, we're going through some bad times now with the plant shutting down and trying to take our insurance away from us.
If you've ever inside the factory, there's a main aisle that runs the full length of the factory. And there are some super huge, large signs with a lot of little witty sayings from a lot of them from our CEO. And there's one that says, quality will long be remembered after price is forgotten. They may pay a little extra for our product, but you ask anybody with a 4-wheel drive unit, what is the best product to put in it? And they'll say BorgWarner.
BorgWarner Corporation built their corporation off of Warner Gear Muncie plant.
Well, you could say that Warner Gear started in a bedroom. There were 2 brothers who'd come to Muncie in the early 20th century, Tom and Hugh. And Hugh was a tinkerer, he was an inventor. He'd already invented a couple of devices for telephones, and he'd come to Muncie to work for an electrical company. In his spare time, he tinkered with gears and other parts for this new invention, the automobile. And working in his bedroom, he came up with 2 inventions. One was a differential gear, which was a device that allowed wheels on the same axle to turn at different rates. And you need that to make cars more maneuverable. And he also invented an improved transmission, a sliding gear transmission. And so between these 2 inventions, Warner Gear just took off. It went from a small operation, basically Hugh and Tom and a few people working in a barn with a dirt floor, to within a few years, a place housed in a large factory employing 225 people. And the company continued to grow through the teens and 20s as the automobile industry grew. And by the beginning of World War I, about 1917, it had more than 2,000 employees working in a new large factory just on the edge of Muncie's downtown. In 1928, Warner Gear merged with Borg and Beck and some other companies to create the corporation BorgWarner. In the short term, this didn't mean a whole lot for people living in Muncie or for people working at Warner Gear. But the merger with Borg and Beck and with these other companies was really the first step in the loss of local control over Warner Gear.
Management started changing and, bringing people in from outside that were not familiar with Muncie and the people, in the community. And they were a lot different.
I seen someone said in the paper the other day, it was like a 2-year funeral. It's been a lot like a funeral since they announced the closing. Some people, I think, dealt with it real well, and others have had a rough time with it.
The industries that came to Muncie created thousands of jobs, but it was workers organizing and bargaining collectively for contracts that raised their standard of living to a new high. The new union working class of post-World War II America enjoyed a standard of living never before seen.
My dad helped form the union, and back then they needed unions because during the Depression, when Dad worked there, they'd go out there in the lobby and they'd call a man in and they'd work him for 2 hours and then send him back out the lobby and make him sit maybe for 8 to get another 2. It takes a certain type of person to be able to put up with the fumes and the heat and the cold and the hassle that you have in a plant.
That factory has grown leaps and bounds as far as cleanliness over the years. The old wooden block floors and the sawdust and just the grime. It was like working in a coal mine down there. And over the years, they've cleaned that all up, and there's actually paint on the floors now. I never thought I'd see that day.
It was just machinery everywhere. You didn't see vacant spots or wide open spaces. It was all the same colored machines, green. And it was actually, if you walked away from your machine, if you got 30 foot away, my fear was, what if I get lost and can't get back to my machine? It was really all looked that much alike. So that was a big fear. And now you see it really winding down. If you walk through the place, it's just, they've been taking machinery out for pretty solid for a year. There's just so much gone. And just really a lot different place now.
Well, I look at BorgWarner as being, the foundation of providing this opportunity for the workers in the community. But I look at the workers and the union as being the ones that's helped spread that out to take their money out into the community and their good wealth.
Unionism is an awesome thing. It's designed to help those folks who are weaker and can't help themselves. And standing together as one unit, as a body, is just an awesome ideal. That's one reason why I tried to get my son involved in it. We had a welfare fund, somebody who was hurting. All they had to do was go to the union meeting and say, hey, I'm hurting financially and this is my need. And I've never seen anybody get turned away. That's what unions are about. I mean, it's the families and doing community good.
Some of the men, like the Reynolds family, were part of 3 generations of BorgWarner workers. The Leppards had 9 family members working there at one time.
They try not to get us brothers in the same department together. They try to keep that apart. That's the reason why we meet in the cafeteria in the mornings. We'll have a little session and everybody go about their way. We done that every day. It started out a little group, then ended up in the big group. Everybody wanted to get in and see what was going on.
I really liked it. It was, you're there, you meet a lot of new people, a lot of friends. It's sad right now, too. See all these people leaving. Worked with them for, 25 to 30 years. But some become like part of your family,
I was very fortunate in the fact that Well, both of my grandfathers worked there. My father worked there. I had a great uncle that worked there. I know a lot of people. And a lot of the guys that hired in when I hired in, their dads worked there, their grandfathers worked there. So yeah, it was a very family-oriented company at one point in time.
And this is true, as bizarre as it may sound, that they actually had it written in the contract that if the son or nephew of an employee applied for a job, he had to be hired over an unaffiliated person. It was a contractual agreement. Now, those were all struck from the contract with the civil rights legislation, because then that's being prejudiced in favor of someone.
They didn't like women working there.
Can you explain that?
They hated women working there, so they'd like set you up a lot of times.
When we first came into the plant, there was only like 4 white women, and it was a bunch of black women that came in. And they really made it hard for us because we never worked in a factory like that. And we did different things that others didn't do.
They'd have you pick up 5-gallon buckets of oil or coolants and stuff and watch you struggle to dump them in the machine going, yep, that's what you got to do.
I felt within myself to do more and better because I was a black woman and I never worked in a plant as large as BorgWarner. And I did special things, whatever the supervisor asked, I tried to do.
That whole group of guys that felt that way either died or moved on. Some of them stayed. We had 3 that stayed till they had 62 years in there. Can you imagine? No women did that. No. They told me in the front office that I could be out August 1st. I was like, see you. Bye-bye.
Coming up young, we used to go to the annual Labor Day union picnics. The first thing came to mind was when you're at these picnics, it seemed like a big congregation or church. And when I started, I remember trying to ask my grandfather about, well, he called me brother. Why is he calling you brother, you know? And my grandfather said, I'll explain it to you, I'll explain it to you. But it's just the way that unions are. They really have this bind, especially back then.
Yeah, it's important that young people know what the unions are and have an understanding of them, because they are a good thing. It's your voice on your job. To bring my daughters involved in the union, they know all about the union. I raised them the same way my father raised me, you know, that to understand what the union is and let them know this is why we have the things that we have. We were thankful that BorgWarner as a company was here to provide a job, and we were most thankful for the union to make sure that things were good and fair. So my daughters clearly understand what the union's about and how they function.
BorgWarner as a union, as a group of men, women, children, we were very tight-knit. I mean, we did a lot of things together. You know, the memories I have, like I said, of growing up and the movies and the activities out at Springwater Park, I'll probably never forget.
It was a fun factory back in them days. Everybody couldn't wait to tell everybody what was going on.
I played baseball for Local 287. You know, you look back at some of the old things they've done. They used to have a baseball team. They used to have a rifle shooting team. They used to have bowling leagues and various sports leagues and things. And they were active in the community. They were a big part of the community.
I can remember back before I went into Warner Gear, they sponsored us in Junior League Baseball. We were the Local 287 Chiefs. I remember we had Easter egg hunts. We had skating parties.
I remember the basketball league Dad used to play in and was sponsored by 287.
Yeah, we had that, and then just about anything the union would sponsor, you know.
The union eventually bought a facility, and we had a park. You could go out there on weekends. They had a swimming pool, different courts, basketball courts, volleyball courts. We used to go out there quite often. We go out on the weekends and swam, took picnics, played volleyball, basketball, just went out and enjoyed it. That was the idea of it, have a place to go to. You didn't have to pay to get there.
UAW Local 287 was established in 1937, and that is over 72 years. I think it has to be one of the oldest or longest running UAW locals.
So I owe my union education, I like to say, to my dad. He was always straightforward about it. The quote that I remember best from my father was that there was two kinds of union people. One guy that had his hand out, and another guy that was willing to do something for the union. He always told me what you need to understand about the union is that you don't hold your hand out. The union's already done for you.
Being a part of a union, I always felt like I had something to say or someone to speak for me when it came to my concerns. I thought I wanted to get involved enough to where I would have a say in what's going on and try to understand the union. I wanted to be on the inside instead of being on the outside, even though I worked there. There's a lot of people that work there at BorgWarner and work at any of these other plants that have unions, but they're not involved in the union, so they're just like the rest of the community on the outside. So I wanted to get involved and be on the inside of understanding what unions were all about. So I really feel blessed and honored that my peers felt enough confidence in me to elect me president, being an African American in Muncie.
When I first came to Muncie in the 1960s, Muncie was described to me by outsiders as a really tough union town. It was a town where the unions played a very, very prominent role in every part of the community's life, the economic life, the political life. So the community that I was introduced to was a community that had a great sense of itself. It really did see itself as a very successful, forward-looking community with thousands of people that held these production line jobs at the factories that were all over the community.
Being a member of a union it's got its good points, and I think it's got its bad points too.
They're like any other organization. I mean, they're not perfect. There's all kinds of things wrong, but that's just the way it is, and you work to make those things better.
And I hate to say this because I'm proud of being a union member, and I've been an officer in that union, but I think it overstepped its bounds later on. I think it kept pushing that company to where they had no recourse but to either say, we need help or we're going to move.
Absenteeism, and guys didn't want to work. The union would have to stand up for them, and I didn't think that was right. Because there was too many people out there wanting a job, and you got people in here that didn't want to do nothing.
For lack of better terms, I always use the analogy of there's probably a whore in every congregation. It's just the personalities that was in place with the union. The union philosophy and ideology is a good thing.
Union membership was declining, and the unions began to lose their power. Some workers saw the glory days of brotherhood and solidarity, of picnics and good times, as days that they would never see again.
Honks of support for striking UAW members. The walkout is idling production at the transmission plant. 2,200 union workers are without paychecks.
There were bitter strikes that took a toll on both the union and the company. The principles of 287 and the union began to decline.
The company says the union's proposal threatens planned expansion and could break the company's back.
We're looking at about a 33% increase in cost for our health care claims. We just can't do it year after year. And the investors aren't going to invest $80 million unless they can see an adequate return. And if we don't invest, we don't generate a new generation of transmissions. And if we don't do that, we don't stay competitive and we're out of business.
I used to hear about strikes from my grandfather and even from my dad, But in '89, I had been there 6 years. Never had a strike, never been laid off. But at this point in time, in '89, we felt that we had to go on strike. It was over the health care issue. I remember very well because I was working the afternoon shift. Came midnight that night, and I remember the committee coming down the aisles and telling everybody, let's go, we're out. And I said, oh man, fine, a strike. I've never been through a strike. So we end up walking out. You drop everything you're doing, you get your stuff, and you go on and you walk out. Well, automatically, the union leadership has it already set up for your strike post for where you're gonna, work your post on the strike. And they already had the first shift already on right at midnight. And it was just awesome. I ended up on the day shift, and there's so many of us that you only had to work that one day, 4 hours, whatever that shift you was assigned.
We were captured on films of walking picket line, and had signs out there that that BorgWarner wasn't treating us right because we thought we had guaranteed insurance the rest of our life.
You have people in their 70s or 80s have no clue of what they're going to do. They can't go to work, but yet this company is so cold to want to go after their health care insurance.
As important as insurance is, the magnitude of the cost is it's not free anymore if people don't chip in. The employers are the employees in great jeopardy of the employers backing out of commitments on health care.
Now that when I look back on that, we didn't realize that it was going to become an issue down the road. And that's what I meant by when I say that these companies don't do anything at the last minute.
During the strike, when management was in there running, I thought it was great for them to run some of them jobs and see how tough they was, because they really had no clue. There's a lot of hard feelings. I wasn't really mad at none of them because that was their job. That's their livelihood, They had to do what they had to do, and I had to do what I had to do. Matter of fact, a good friend of mine was on supervision. I bowled with him all the time, and he said, we were still bowling. He said, you sure you want to bowl with me? And I said, well, yeah. I said, you're still my friend. I said, this has got nothing to do with it. I said, you're taking care of yourself. I got to take care of myself.
And we only had one strike. At my time at Warner Gear was in 1989. So it was my first experience on the picket line. It was enlightening and scary, at the same time. But again, it was the reality of it. It was also an eye-opener to me that the unions were in danger. In today's, even in 1989, it was hard to be on strike. I mean, people need to work.
The company has told us it's not the fact that they can't afford to pay, it's the fact that they are unwilling to pay, and I feel that is wrong.
It worked out on the issue of the health care, but I think it left an everlasting scar on Local 287 and BorgWarner.
A busy BorgWarner plant at shift change. More than 1,000 strikers are back at work after 7 weeks picketing the plant. They have an agreement on a new 3-year contract.
I don't think our local was ever the same after the '89 strike because all of this stuff started progressing after that. And I think that's when they started getting themselves ready to either close the plant or downsize it to just an assembly plant.
700 will remain on layoff for at least 1 week. BorgWarner says it's due to a soft market for transmissions.
So I suspect there'll be somewhat under 500 after the first week, and then we'll be bringing back others and probably end up with 300-400 people laid off in total.
It was tough. I mean, to see that big of a chunk of our work leave like that and then have that massive layoff. At that time, we were over 2,000 workers, and that knocked us down to about 1,100 after that.
At the time the contracts were negotiated, the demands that the unions made and that were granted to them in the contracts were not seen as unrealistic because the automobile companies were making so much money. They came to be unrealistic as competition, globalization became significant factors that created a much different perspective on we can no longer endure these kinds of legacy costs for the members of these locals.
In the 80s there, when we was going so good that our other BorgWarner plants was down and we was actually the ones keeping them going. And then all of a sudden, plants are going to China and Mexico and That's hurt everybody.
Back in 2006, was a significant vote about opening up the contract. We gave up our cost of living, we gave up our profit sharing, we gave up our year-end bonus, our prescripts went up, and we paid a higher premium on our health care. BorgWarner evidently didn't think they got enough. They wanted to reopen the contract in 2006. We felt that we gave them enough. Who's ever twisting that to make it look like that vote decided to close the plant is far from the truth.
I personally believe the plant was closing in the near future. When I went to that vote, I strongly believed that the plant was closing. But what I did believe is that if the union took concessions, that we could have survived a little bit longer. That's my opinion.
It's important to emphasize that to the union, a contract is almost what I would call a sacred document, that the contracts were negotiated in good faith between management and the union, and what is in that contract is supposed to be adhered to by both parties. In 2006, BorgWarner, perhaps sensing some weakness in the union between the retiree group and those who were still in this now quite small workforce, decided to do some push and see if the members of the union would be willing to negotiate to open the contract and take a long, hard look at some of the retiree benefits. The union voted unanimously not to do that.
If we'd have took a vote and took concessions, they're still going to close the plant. That's the way I see it. Because you don't come 2 months for a place that big and they say they're going to close it, no matter, they tell you in 2 months. Then they've had this in their plans for a long time. It just don't come up all of a sudden. Because they had to be working on where stuff was going to be, and so I think regardless of our vote in 2006 on taking concessions or opening the contract back up, they was going to close it anyway.
If you look at their situation, they've got 60 or 63 plants, and the vast majority of them is overseas. That's how they make their money. I mean, that's just the way it is. I mean, BorgWarner operates overseas. There's a few here, and it's really like the BorgWarner trophy, that's presented at the Indy 500. I mean, that's our trophy. I mean, that's from BorgWarner.
Perhaps the most famous automobile race in the world is the Indy 500. People from around the world watch it every year. Millions of them watch it. At the end of the race, they see the winner hoist the BorgWarner trophy. The BorgWarner trophy is a gift of the BorgWarner Corporation. One of the first winners of the Indianapolis 500 drove a car that had a Warner gear differential, had a Warner gear transmission, had a number of other Warner gear parts. There's an intimate connection between the rise of Warner gear and this famous trophy and this famous race. Muncie's experienced really a sea change in its economic character over the last several decades. Where once it was a factory town with a dozen or more factories employing hundreds, if not thousands of people, by the time you get to the end of the 20th century and into the 21st century, the largest employers in the city are a state university, Ball State University, and a regional hospital, Ball Memorial Hospital. In fact, by the early 21st century, both Ball State and Ball Hospital employ each about 3,000 people. And that's roughly the size a couple decades earlier of roughly the number of employees employed by the two big auto parts plants in town, the Chevy plant and Warner Gear. As Muncie deindustrializes, it's an emblem of that process. It's a representative of that larger process. It's something that's happened all over the country. It's happened in Gary, Indiana. It's happened in Lima, Ohio. It's happened in Youngstown, Ohio. It's happened in Braddock, Pennsylvania. It's happened in Camden, New Jersey. If you go all across the slice of the country that industrialized in the early 20th century, all these places are deindustrializing now. And so all of these communities face the same challenge that Muncie faces, that Middletown faces, to reinvent itself in the age of a global economy.
Well, the closing of BorgWarner obviously it's a closing of an era for us because it was our last a union shop that we have here. And I think it really sent a message to the community that we are changing. I have discovered, as I've been in office, that the I-69 corridor from Fort Wayne to Indianapolis is considered the Rust Belt corridor. Now, you've heard of the Rust Belt, which includes Ohio and Michigan and Indiana. But if you look at the map and you look at foreign investment, especially from the Japanese, you're going to see the majority of it is south of I-70. And when we are in our meetings with presidents and CEOs and board members of corporations that we're soliciting for their investment, that question does come up. And one of the things that still stands out, and I know that our union employees don't necessarily like hearing this, but when we're whipping out our map of Indiana and showing them where we are in proximity, and then showing them where the automotive manufacturers in Princeton and London and all that, the thing that comes up is, oh, you're north of I-70. And so we're in the conversation, it just comes out that they have heard that East Central Indiana is big union. And as we've continued to have businesses shutter, I think that we've thought, okay, well, maybe, it's still going to be okay, we're still hanging on. But when it closed, I think that sent a message to the community that our past is now our past, and what do we want to be as a community in the future, and what direction do we want to go in?
As early as the 1960s, BorgWarner was setting up operations in Europe. By the time you get to the 1980s and 1990s, it's opening factories in not only places like Italy and Germany, but Japan and China. And so it was becoming really a global corporation.
As Muncie's industrial base began to shrink, thousands of well-paying production line jobs were lost, a victim of globalization and outsourcing. In Muncie, the list is long. Westinghouse, Delco Battery, Warner Gear, and here the site of the General Motors manual transmission plant known locally as Muncie Chevrolet. 3,000 well-paying jobs gone, not to be replaced.
This is something that Muncie has just seemed to be, been going through, especially with the Chevrolet plant closing a couple of years ago. And it's, we're getting kind of numb to it, basically. Outside, those are outside of the workplace. But I have really seen Muncie change over the years.
Muncie is famous as Middletown. It was the subject of a sociological study completed by Robert and Helen Lynn during the 1920s. The Lynns came to Muncie to study the relationship between the classes, between what they call the working class and the business class. We would call it the middle class.
And the Middletown Studies are, without any question, the first participant observer studies of a small industrializing American city to look at the differences in every part of one's life.
And so they arrived in the 1920s and studied every facet of the community's life: religious life, civic life, home life, education, work, and so forth.
No one had ever studied an American community. Now, admittedly, what they were looking at was the effect of industrialization on a small American city. But when they looked at it from the standpoint of people in the business class do this. People in the working class go here, go there, belong to this club, live in this part of town. And so that's really what the playoff is throughout the Middletown books.
And they produced this incredibly detailed study, which they called Middletown, which they published in 1929. And the book was an enormous success. It was a bestseller, it was widely read, it was widely reviewed and widely praised. In fact, it's remained in print ever since and is considered a classic sociological study. Everybody knows about Muncie, whether they know it or not, because the findings of Middletown crept into social studies textbooks, crept into college history textbooks, and so forth. And so the city really has become a laboratory for understanding industrialization, its impact on people's lives, daily lives, work lives, community life, and so forth.
The closing of Local 287 will be a sad situation. There's a lot of people that have dedicated their lives in the union movement and making Local 287 a good, solid union. And it has been a very good union.
When it came down to the final vote of those who were still working in the plant, shortly before the plant closed its doors, there was a vote on whether people were going to continue to try to have their health care or they were going to take a buyout. By taking the buyout, it meant that they gave up any claim on retiree health care. The vote was to take the money and to give up the health care.
This is the committee room. My office is upstairs. All the committee rooms are downstairs. This is our conference room when we wanted to discuss anything privately, and sometimes I would have some people up here that wanted to talk to me one-on-one, and then I would come up here. But a lot of these windows that you're seeing were all covered. You could not see. It shocked me when I took the books out. I'm like, wow. But that was the mentality that we had to deal with in here. When like I told you, it's real. And this would actually be my office right here. A little small, but it worked. This is where I sat and worked.
The company did not say, we're going out of business because we're broke or we're going to close the Muncie facility. What it was, it's the health care. We're spending too much money on health care. And from their perspective, if you put yourself on their side of the table, I understand. You're paying billions, and for health care.
A lot of the arguments went on in here, in this room. I mean, I've walked out of here many a day because I don't take part in that, the name calling and all, it's just ugly. But a lot of it took place right in here.
So the company just drew the line in the sand, and what I am critical of the local leadership at that point in time was that they were unable to see the whole picture. It wasn't just Muncie, Indiana. It was on the news on every goddamn channel every night about health care affecting somebody somewhere. If it wasn't the teachers, it was the firefighters. If it wasn't the firefighters, it's Chrysler. Everyone had this health care dilemma.
It was ugly, man. It was ugly. We was the most divided committee in the history of this local, to be honest with you. And there was 3 guys on the committee that just wanted to sell that insurance no matter what. They just wanted to sell it because they felt like that's the only way that the company was going to give them any severance pay. And the company made us believe that, but they would have gave us a severance package, but it wouldn't have been near what we get now because we did actually ended up selling it. But it was a nightmare. I mean, it was 4 against 3.
And I don't think that our local leadership could see that big picture. They just thought that the company had cried wolf too many times, that they were a profitable company, and they were, and they still are, a profitable company. But they wasn't grasping the mentality that, from the company standpoint, we're spending too much money on healthcare and we're going to stop. That was the bottom line.
It all became about money. Actually, 3 of us on the committee ended up becoming just like the company or corporations, greed. And that's what really made the division like that. I mean, we wanted all the same things, but we didn't want to go about it the way that they wanted to go about getting it. They felt like if we didn't sell it, we weren't going to get anything.
I hear people say, only as an example, I worked here 30 goddamn years. I deserve that pension or insurance. I earned it, and it shouldn't be taken away. That statement is true and correct in my mind.
I did everything I could to help the retirees because we sold that insurance. Now it opens the door for the company to say, well, what do you mean you got lifetime benefit? You just sold, the retirees that came out, you just sold their insurance. And that's what they're going to use in court, I think. And which is wrong because when people retire, you're supposed, in any other companies, when you retire, that's your lifetime benefit. Whatever you go out with, that's what you're supposed to keep. But they don't feel that way. They want to come after the health care.
But there's also another truth to that you, as an example, have your 30 years and you earned that health care. Me, on the other hand, have not. I got 25 or 26 years in. Now, the reality of it is, yes, you're right. You earned it, you deserve it. Also, the reality of it for me is, if you don't make a change, I'm not going to have a job. That's the reality of it.
The reason that 8-9 million or whatever up there is because the company supposedly had $43 million on the table for us to say yes to. Well, just to say here's 43 million and we don't know who's getting what, you know what I mean, by seniority or what, it wasn't broke down, so we couldn't do it. Well, when we finally got it broke down and went in there to finalize it, they told us we didn't handle it in a timely manner, and they pulled it 43 off the table.
When I criticize the local leadership about what we've done, I go back to the convention and the theme about it's a new game. If you don't change strategies, you'll cease to exist. I think that's what happened at Warner Gear.
And it's always been customary, not just here in this local, but in the UAW, that when a person retires, he gets a watch, an engraved watch for his time of service. Well, we're not getting watches. I mean, I can afford to go buy a watch. I don't need a watch when I retire. But it's something it's just customary. And it's just something some people got until the funds ran out. So it's like if you're gonna buy it for anybody, you ought to buy it for everybody.
When that last day we walked out on April 24th, and 3 days later, the International's coming in, and we're going down to the courthouse, to the banks, and changing everything over. I thought maybe, you know, they'd kind of wait around a little bit. I mean, not wait, but give us a chance to, I don't know, kind of get through it a little bit, you know. Once that happens, there's no such thing as a Local 287 anymore. It's gone. It happens just that quick.
Since we don't have employees, you know, and we don't have a local union anymore, the regional director come and got our charter and took it to Detroit, and they sold Springwater Park to a church. And so we don't have a place. We still have the retiree chapter, but you know, like I said, that's all we have. We got pictures and things.
To be elected president and being the last president of the local is an honor in itself. It was a tough job at a time when you're talking about a plant closing. Did the thought come across my mind that they just throw me in there because nobody wants it now? Yes, a little bit.
Everybody's known of the BorgWarner trophy that the Indianapolis 500 has given out forever, and those were people took pride in those things, and now that pride's gone. And I think there's a sadness like losing a friend, like losing a dear friend. I think it goes beyond a company closing.
And so when you talk about what it's done to the community, you know, when the jobs are not here, then somebody has to pick the role up in the community. And I can see the mayor of Muncie now, the lady is having a lot of problems.
There's a real sense of, I don't know if it's a sense of failure, but there's certainly a sense of remorse about the fact that that building is closed. I mean, I know when I drive past BorgWarner today, you know, one of the first things they did was they took the signs down. And that really kind of told me it was over.
This is a story about Muncie, Indiana, the nation's Middletown, and its automotive history, and its unions that helped shape the American middle class. This was once the site of Warner Gear. 6,000 people worked here. They built transmissions for the big three automakers. Their slogan was, "Quality is remembered, long after price is forgotten." But this was also the home of UAW Local 287. Their emblem was on the sign next to that of BorgWarner. This gave them their place in the community, their identity. They're part of Muncie, Indiana.
When you put almost half of your life at a place, you can't help but have some emotional ties. It's a whole lot different than I worked here, I'm ready to retire, move on. You could ride by and say, yeah, I worked there, I put in a lot of good years there. We had some good times.
Just sad, and it's really hard to even come in this place anymore, just thinking about what's going on.
And there used to be, it was a big, they called it the Wall of Fame inside, and it was a list, had these little name tags on it of all the people that came through BorgWarner that's retired with 30 years. And it had like the current people that could retire on one little end of it, and you just see these thousands of names of people that came through here, and you could just kind of look through and see people that maybe you've heard of or knew years ago, or like my wife's grandfather worked here. I mean, just a lot of people that came through this. This was just the ones that retired with 30 years. There's like thousands of them. So you just can't get the impact of how much, how many people has this place touched, in the years it's been here.
It's a sad day knowing that there's the vast majority of the workforce to be let go today and never to return.
The main thing to me is to really try to get people to understand you need to close the chapter, start a new chapter, and that's the attitude I'm gonna take. That's it.